First off, I just want to say thank you for all your support on this channel so far. This is something that I started as more or less a side project slash hobby, and it's gone a lot better than expected. Which brings us into the topic of today's video, and that is, what is the true cost of owning an exotic car? And I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be an exotic car. Pretty much any high-end performance car that costs a lot of money is going to be covered in this video. And I want to be very clear in saying that this is not my advice to you on how to go about buying an exotic car. This is just me sharing my experience and the numbers associated with said experience. This is more about sharing information than anything else. I should also mention that if your objective is to buy a certain car and keep it for the rest of your life, then really none of this advice applies to you. If you pay $300,000 for a car and you never sell it, it costs $300,000. So I guess we'll start with the internet's stereotypical perspective of how buying an exotic car should go. You have to have $10 million in the bank and be able to pay cash. If you can't do that, you can't afford it. I definitely understand why a lot of people would think that this is the best way of doing things, and in certain instances, 100% it is. But I'll say this much: if you've made enough money to be in a position to pay cash for any kind of high-end car, then I think that you probably know, given your situation in terms of what you do, where that money is going to be most useful. Is it going to be more worth it for you to pay for that car in cash, or finance it, lease it, whatever it may be, and use that money elsewhere during the time of ownership for that particular vehicle? Unless you're purchasing something super rare and super collectible where it's legitimately going to appreciate over time, investing your money in almost any kind of car, it's a depreciating asset. So putting as little money into that to maintain that hobby, because for most people this is just a hobby, and then using that money elsewhere to make more money, I think for a lot of people in a position to own and buy a supercar like this, that's probably going to be the best direction to go in. So now that we got that out of the way, let me give you a real life example of how much I paid for an exotic car and how much I sold it for, and what the true cost was at the end of what was a 2-year ownership span. So the very first exotic car that I ever purchased was a 2016 Lamborghini Huracan 610-4. And I want to clarify a few things before we move forward. First of which is that I live in Canada, and this was purchased from a Canadian Lamborghini dealer. I bought the car brand new. The Canadian car market, as I've explained in a previous video, is a little bit unique versus the US market because we just get a lot less of these cars. So something like a regular Lamborghini Huracan, which isn't limited, there's probably 10 times more Huracans on the market in the US versus Canada. As a whole, because there are less cars in Canada, the values tend to stay a little bit higher versus what you'll find in the US. Also, I will be referring to all of these prices in Canadian dollars because that's obviously what I'm most familiar with, but whenever I mention a dollar amount, I'll have the USD conversion on screen as well. Either way, 2016 Huracan, brand new at the dealer. It was the only brand new Huracan for sale in the entire country at the time. Sticker price on the window was $333,000, and I managed to get the car for $315,000. Which brings us to the first pro tip here, which again goes against the internet's perspective of how you should buy an exotic car. If you have so much money, who cares what you pay for it? Always negotiate, always get a discount, because there are discounts to be given, especially on brand new cars. So why did I pick this specific car? Now, you would have heard me mention that this was the only brand new Huracan for sale in the entire country at the time, 2016 being the second model year for the Lamborghini Huracan. There were a few 15s for sale that were used, but because there was such demand on the Huracan at that point in time, and there were so few of them in the country, that it really didn't make that much sense to buy a used 2015 model year, because it would have been basically $300,000 versus $315,000 for a brand new one. So I decided that it was the best choice to go for a brand new car. And I also figured that at the end of the 2-year plan that I had for this particular car, my 2016 model year would be worth more than a 2015 model year. So I wasn't really saving that much in the long term. My point in all this is that timing played a really big role in this particular purchase, because there was a lot of hype around the Lamborghini Huracan at this point in time. And hype can work for and against you in the car market. You want a car to be hyped up in the sense that people are very interested in the car and there's a big demand for it. And if you can get one of those cars where there's lots of demand but very little supply, that's typically a good recipe for holding its value in the long term. But if it's a car that's really expensive and there's not a lot of demand for, that means that you're gonna pay a lot of money for it, and the second you drive away, it's going to depreciate a ton. Something else I had to decide before making this purchase was how long I planned on keeping this car for. And initially my plan was 2 years. And the reason why that was my set time frame is because I figured that after 2 years, the amount of mileage I did on the car would be at a point where I might want to get rid of it. Second thing is I can kind of reevaluate what the car market is doing. Like I mentioned, there was a lot of hype around the Huracan back when I bought it, but I figured in 2 years' time, it was very likely that something new would come out from Lamborghini, whether it was a new Huracan variant or something else entirely from another brand that would pull the hype away from something like a Huracan, obviously lessening the demand and increasing the potential for depreciation because less people are interested in the car. So I ended up paying $315,000 for this 2016 Lamborghini Huracan 610-4, and included in the purchase price was front-end PPF, so I didn't have to pay for that after the fact, which could have been potentially an extra $2,000 to $3,000 depending on where you got it done. And if you want it done right, you're gonna end up paying a little bit more for that. Either way, the car was a pretty average spec for a 610-4. You're not going to find a ton of variation as far as options go. You can spend a lot of money on spec on pretty much any car, but I don't think that there's a lot of value that's going to come out of that when you go to resell it after the fact. And I can make an entire video talking about spec because I think it's a very interesting topic. But the car was in Giallo Midas, which is a bright yellow, which is kind of funny because I always told myself that if there ever came a day when I could own a Lamborghini, I would not want to own one in one of the stereotypical flashy bright colors like the neon green, neon orange, or neon yellow. Now this wasn't necessarily a neon yellow, but like I said, it was the only new one available in the entire country, so I settled for it, and ultimately it did look quite good. Let's talk about car insurance for a second, because this is something that a lot of people are always curious about, because these are very expensive cars. How much do they cost to insure? And there are so many variables to car insurance that what I pay on this car won't necessarily be what you pay on the exact same car. But I'll say this much, if you can afford the car in the first place, typically the car insurance dollar amount that you'll end up paying is probably not going to scare you away. I don't want to go into specifically what I pay and what I have paid in the past, because at this very point in time, I have a very good relationship, I feel, with my insurance company, and I don't want to change that. But I'll say this much, it depends on so many different things: where you live, your age, your driving history. Luckily for me, I have a very clean driving record, believe it or not, and knock on, I don't even know what that's, probably aluminum. I actually don't have any speeding tickets. The only ticket that I have is for no front plate on that very same Lamborghini that I'm talking about in this video, that I got the very first time that I drove it. And just to quickly finish talking about car insurance cost, the one thing that I will say is, aside from obviously having a clean driving record working to your benefit, your age actually is a huge factor. At least it has been for me. I'm 27 years old now. I was 23 years old at the time. And my car insurance is significantly more expensive because of how young I am versus if I was 35. If I was 35 or older, my cost of car insurance would be significantly less. Also, car insurance is very car specific. Again, just to give you an example, this AMG GTR is actually more expensive to insure than my Huracan Performante. How that makes sense, I have absolutely no idea, but that's the way it goes. Now let's talk about running costs for a second. And this was part of the justification for me buying a new Lamborghini versus a used Gallardo as an example, which I could have got for significantly less money. It would have had a little bit of mileage on it. I wasn't too concerned about being the first owner for the most part, but I was very concerned about something potentially blowing up and having a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 repair bill, which I could afford. Again, I don't think you should be getting into cars like this if you have to worry about these repair bills potentially putting you out on the street, because that's obviously not a good situation to put yourself in. But it is a situation that I found to be stressful and I wanted to avoid pretty much at all costs. So buying a brand new Huracan with a full warranty, if something did go wrong, which was unlikely, it'd be paid for through the warranty, and I kind of had that peace of mind for paying that little bit of extra. So as far as running costs go, all I really had to worry about was putting gas in the car and doing my yearly service. As far as how much I spent on fuel, honestly, I have no idea. Again, if you're buying a car like that, I would think that the cost of fuel is going to be relatively negligible, at least it should be. And then as far as my yearly service is concerned, I ended up bringing the car to the Lamborghini dealer, which was the right choice at the time because obviously I was confident they were going to do it right, but it is very expensive to get a car like that serviced at the dealer. If I'm remembering correctly, it was either $1,100 or $1,200 for what is a pretty basic oil change. As far as tires and brakes go, again, a brand new car, you don't have to worry about that quite as much. If you are over a 2-year span only driving the car on the road, you're probably not going to need to change the tires unless it's coming with something really, really sticky. On my car, I had it on track a couple times and that took a lot of life out of the tires. That was towards the end of my ownership. And honestly, at the end of 2 years, that car was probably ready for a brand new set of tires, but I didn't end up having to change them through my ownership, so no cost associated there. And then the car was also fitted with carbon ceramics, which was standard on a 610-4, and I had to do nothing to those either. So as far as tires and brakes go, on a newer car over 2 years, cost me absolutely nothing. The only real money that I put into the car as far as modifications go were basically 9 months after I bought it. Like I said, the yellow wasn't my first choice of color, so I had the car wrapped in matte black with these gloss black stripes down the middle. Also tinted the headlights yellow, which I'm not sure is actually legal, but I never got pulled over for it, so we'll go with it. It looked really cool, and I also ended up spending, I want to say it was about $1,000 on this carbon fiber kind of duckbill wing that went on the back. It was a very subtle thing, but I thought it looked quite cool, and honestly, it was worth it for me because wrapping the whole car, doing a complete color change like that, it looked like a completely new vehicle. And honestly, it kind of gave me the experience of having a new Lamborghini all over again. So pretty much exactly at the 2-year mark, like I originally planned, I reevaluated where this Lamborghini Huracan was and what was available for sale at that time. Because as predicted, the Huracan Performante was announced. I don't think they had delivered any by that point in time, at least not in Canada. And all the hype was on the Performante rather than on the regular Huracan, especially because all the reviews, which have a big impact on hype around certain cars, believe it or not, all the reviews were basically saying that the Huracan Performante is this huge jump over the regular Huracan, which now that I actually have one myself, I can attest to that. It is legitimately a very different experience. Either way, the market on the regular Huracans was still pretty strong, but it was definitely starting to decline, and I was very concerned that it was going to drop a lot more than it already had after 2 years of ownership. So ideally what I would have liked to have done is traded the car in and got something else, but I wasn't super sold on the Huracan yet, and again, I didn't order one, so I didn't want to wait or anything like that. I just decided I'm going to sell this car back to the dealer and see what I can get for it. Luckily, and this is something else that I think is a good thing to do, is stay in contact with the dealer that you bought the car from. And as long as you're somebody that's not like hell-bent on keeping it for the entire 2 years, I always tell them that, hey, if there's a customer that you have for my car and you can get me out of it for a decent price, if I can get more for the car because you already have a customer, then yeah, I'm absolutely willing to sell you the car. So that's pretty much what I did. I told them, hey, if you're interested in the car, if you have somebody for it and you can give me maximum value out of it, then I'll sell it back to you and do with it what you want. I don't really care. And that's what ended up happening. I sold them the car back and they sold it to somebody else basically within the same week. And what I ended up getting for the car was $269,000, which at the time was pretty good money for a 2-year-old Lamborghini. So not including running costs like fuel as well as insurance, because quite frankly, I don't know those numbers, and not including the cost of wrapping my car and buying that carbon fiber spoiler, because that's not something that I needed to do. I bought the car for $315,000 and then 2 years later sold it for $269,000. My total cost of ownership over a 2-year span was $46,000. Where if you break down $46,000 into monthly payments, basically that Lamborghini Huracan costed me less than $2,000 a month, which if you ask me, for a $300,000 car, it's not that bad. And I want to be very clear in saying that this specific dollar amount is specific to this car during this time in this particular situation. Every single car is going to be a little bit different, or a lot different. And let's think about this for a second, because $46,000 over a span of 2 years seems like a lot of money, but think about all the cars that are far less expensive that you could buy that are going to do pretty well the same amount of depreciation in a 2-year span. If you went and bought a $120,000 Range Rover after 2 years, guess what? You probably lost $46,000. If you buy any of what is a very popular category of car, which is like the high performance sedan. So if you go buy a C63, an M4, an M3, an Audi RS5, these are all cars that in Canada retail for right around $100,000, can go all the way up to $130,000, depending on what you option in them. But after 2 years, they're gonna legitimately do $50,000 of depreciation. My point here is that people really get wrapped up in the dollar value of the car, but don't consider that the exotic car or supercar category, whatever you want to call it, it's unique in that, yes, the cars are very expensive, but the depreciation curve is typically a lot different from most normal cars and certainly luxury cars. If you want to lose the most amount of money on an expensive car, go buy a Rolls Royce, go buy a Bentley, go buy an Aston Martin, go buy these luxury cars, which are beautiful, by the way. I'd love to own a bunch of these one day, but these are legitimately cars where you go buy a brand new Rolls Royce for $500,000, the second that it leaves the dealer's lot, you've lost $50,000. I don't care what anyone says. And this brings into conversation the new versus used argument, where given the circumstances of that particular Lamborghini and the demand that was on the car at that point in time, it made more sense for me to buy a brand new one. But in the case of this AMG GTR, as an example, it's a 2018 model year. Sticker price on this car was $223,000. It has basically all the options except the carbon ceramic brakes, but it does have the 2 carbon packages, which are quite expensive. And I ended up getting the car for $183,000 or $184,000, which is a significant amount of depreciation considering the car basically only had 4,000 kilometers on it. So that's a perfect example of where it would have been a bad idea to buy a new one versus a used one. And then something else that I touched on earlier, in the case of buying something that is 4, 5, 6 years old in the supercar category, that's when the car is now out of warranty. That's when the car has potentially seen 2 or 3 different owners. It's done some significant mileage, and you could potentially run into one of those $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 repair bills that you see so many of these guys on YouTube buying these really nice, seemingly nice cars for very low dollar amounts, and then they bring it to the garage and almost everything needs to be changed off the car. That's why the car is so much less expensive in the first place. For me personally, I would rather pay a little bit more for a newer car, pick the right model that I'm confident is going to hold its value, and that aspect of the car market is always a little bit of a gamble because there is a chance you could lose significantly more money than you might have anticipated. I'd rather pay more for that little bit of peace in mind and know that nothing is likely to go wrong, and if it does go wrong, I have a warranty, and then at the end of the day, when I decide to get rid of the car after 2 or 3 years, it's only going to cost me X amount of dollars anyways. And this is me from the perspective of somebody that just likes to experience cars. I don't really consider myself to be a collector because, as you guys saw in the video where I went through my entire car history, I haven't really kept any cars for more than like 2.5 years at a time. I don't really get emotionally attached to cars. I just like to experience them, and after 2 years, for the most part, I would say most of the time, I feel like I got out of that car what I wanted and I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So as long as you can make the right choices in doing so, it's not going to be quite as expensive as you might think it would be. So for me, it's always been about the in price and the out price, and then whatever that number is in between, that's what your true cost of ownership typically ends up being. Anyways, guys, that's it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. Feel free to share your own stories and experiences on this topic down below in the comment section. I'm always curious to hear what other people have done and their logic in doing certain things. And if you have any questions or suggestions for other content you'd like to see on the channel, leave that down below. Obviously, because of the current situation, we're not supposed to be driving around, and Canada, at least where I live right now, it's been snowing for like the last week or so. So none of these cars have really been able to get out on the road, but there is going to be more in-car content coming soon on the channel as soon as it's possible to do something like that. If you don't want to miss out, hit the subscribe button as well as the little bell notification so you get notified when the next new video goes live. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.